Welcome to Faithcast, a Faith in the Forest ministry. Be sure to hit that notification bell to stay up to date on great new content. Now, here is your host, Pastor Keith.
All right, good morning and welcome to episode 3. We are on the gospel of rock and roll, and I promised everybody today that we were going to talk about the Battle of the Beatles, a song of good and a song of evil, as I see it. Although it's really not a song of evil, that's pretty harsh, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. I've had a couple people reach out to us, want to know about how to help support the ministry that we're doing, help us grow it. Still finalizing the online giving platform that will be on the tidioutcreek.org website. Prayerfully, that'll be up by the end of the week. But in the meantime, if you would like to give to the church and the ministry, I apologize, I'm laughing. Sassy the dog is in the studio, slapping her tail around everything. But if you'd like to give to the ministry, send to the CTC, P.O. Box 7, Warren, PA 16365, and we greatly appreciate it. And so, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. So we're talking about the secular music that we listen to. And are you going to be in here?
Yes.
Can you move so I can see it? Because I want to look over at you, and you're like right behind the one studio light.
That was a plan.
That was the plan, okay.
To not be seen.
Well, I promise you won't be seen by anybody online. But so we're talking about the secular music that we listen to and the faith that's intertwined into it. And so last week, if you haven't seen the episode, it's up on YouTube, and we talked about how all of the genres tie together, and they're really connected, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of music. And today, we're going to start looking at individual songs and how artists, where they were at, influenced the songs they wrote and the songs they sang. But when we do this, I want you to keep an open mind, because as we give some of the history of the songs in the next few weeks, and it was interesting for me. I don't want to give away one of the songs that I'm going to be talking about coming up, but one of the songs that influenced me with a spiritual aspect in a very, very small way, I never realized what the artist was actually talking about in the song. You hear the words on a superficial level, and you just assume it's all about whatever God is already influenced into you. And that brings me to the very first thing that I want to do today, and we need to start out with a little bit of scripture. And we are in John 14:16. I have like every version of this verse up here. So in the NIV version of John 14:16, Jesus answered, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." I need to share that because as a faith-based church that we are, we believe in the truth of Jesus Christ. And Christianity is the only religion where there is a specific call to a way to heaven. And I need to bring that up because as we start talking about the artist today, I'm going to defend, in a way, I'm going to show respect to, let me put it that way, I'm going to show respect to the Hindu religion because from the earthly aspect, most religions have very good intent here on earth. And there's much to be learned from people living good and the morality that comes from it. But when we start looking at eternity, then we have to, as Christians, we have to draw the line and say, no, wait a minute. This is what we believe in Christianity. Because if we just stop our faith talking about all of the things that all religions have in common. It's sort of interesting, we're talking about music and how music goes back and music intertwines with each other. We can say the same thing about religion. Religion going all the way back has intertwined and religions have overlapped. I mean, Christianity itself comes from the Judeo faith. I mean, it is the fulfillment of the Torah. And so we interlap with the Jewish faith, and if we look at Islam, interconnects with Christianity and Judaism and religions of the Far East. So they all interlap and have commonalities. It's just when we get to that point of eternal salvation that we say, no, wait a minute, this is where we separate ourselves. And so because I'm going to be talking about some faith today and looking at the earthly aspect and the good that it is, I don't want to make it sound like I'm sugarcoating and discounting the faith of Jesus Christ. Because if we do that, then there's no reason for us to ever talk about the fact that he died on the cross for us. So a little bit of more religion than we were going to do this morning, but I think it was important for me to give that disclaimer if I'm going to do a podcast where I'm talking about other religions and looking at the positive aspects of them. So here's a second thing that I would like all of you who are listening to, if you're listening to the Facebook Live here, you can do it in the comment sections. If you're doing the YouTube, we'll have a rebroadcast, which, by the way, episodes 1 and 2 are already on YouTube. But in the... What was that? Kathy, give me a thumbs up. If you're on there, you can do it in the comment section. I really want you to start sharing secular songs that you realized had a moment of faith, that may have been just something that was subconscious, planted a little bit of a seed, and if it was more profound, then if you'd love to share the story, then go to tidiucreek.org, find my email. It's pastork@tidiucreek.org. Send me an email, and if you'd like for me to share a testimony of secular music, sharing faith, that'd be pretty cool. So with that, is there anything else? Do you have anything? Okay. I like keeping this as casual as possible. So today we are talking about the Beatles. And I don't know, I could spend the whole half-hour podcast just talking about the influence of the Beatles in the world of music and the world of rock and roll. Not only from the mid-1960s when they came on as the British Invasion, coming to America, being on the Ed Sullivan Show, girls passing out, thinking that Paul McCartney was the greatest thing ever, and Ringo Starr, which boggles my mind, but okay. So you had Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, John Lennon, and George Harrison were the Beatles. And they put out an incredible array of music. And I say that because they started out with very simple, and I hate to say that. These guys were so incredibly gifted as musicians and songwriters. And if we just went back into the history of how they got themselves ready before they released as the Beatles, it's just what a dedication to the craft. But if you look at the career of the Beatles, looking back on it, it was almost inevitable that they would break up, because you could see their progression, their maturity in their songs. And when they started out from the simple, I Want to Hold Your Hand, just a simple sort of beboppy, very superficial love song kind of thing, and then moved into, when they got up to like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, you're seeing more of them looking at the culture around them, especially the 60s. I mean, we were in the anti-establishment culture, and all of the peace movements and the protests. It's hard to say that sitting here in 2020 talking about protests back then, thinking about what's going on today, and which actually I'm going to get to by the end of this episode. And you could see it in their songs as it changed, and they started looking at the world around them, and they would put it into their songs. And so it was sort of inevitable that in the differences they had, that they were going to break up as a band and then go off onto their solo careers. And it's when they got to their solo careers that we really see a difference in who they were as individuals and the way they saw the world. And what's really neat for me, God bless the internet, God bless Google. It is so easy for us to research things anymore. And when I first started this, and I made this joke last week that I thought I had this really novel idea looking at the gospel and rock and roll, and then when I started doing research on it, realized how many other people had actually looked at this and how much information was already out there. And so this week I typed in, the faith of the Beatles or the religion and Beatles songs. Do a Google search on that, and it'll just be tons of hits of people who have looked at that. In fact, back in 2013, there was a center of, I want to make sure I say this. It was August 14th, 2013. It was the Center for Spiritual Living in Capistrano Valley in Orange County, California. Okay, that they actually did a Finding the Faith in Your Favorite Beatles Song. And they looked at different Beatles songs, how the artist had one intent when they wrote it, but when we listen to it in our context of today, we might get something completely different out of it. And I laughed when I was reading this article and doing the research on it, because I was like, well, isn't that sort of what we do with the Bible? I mean, we talk about the Bible being a living document. And so the words are the words, but they're God's words, and they're spoken to each of us individually. And although the foundation of them is the solid rock and will never change, and there are inherent truths that transcend every single denomination of Christianity, there are things that we can look at in them that lead us to different areas of ministry, that lead us to where our hearts are in service and where our hearts are in worship and how we connect with God. And it doesn't mean that the words changed or the words contradict themselves or there's contradictions in the Bible. It's God needs to speak to you in a certain way. And we can do the same thing with music. Music is living documents that pour out the soul of the songwriter or the artist, and what you get out of it might be a little bit different than what the next person gets out of it, but it's bringing something to the surface. And so this one, I was thinking of Kathy when I saw this one, because I never really thought about it, is the song Blackbird, written by Paul McCartney. Right, so you remember, because Wayne used to do that song. Our brother-in-law Wayne, God rest his soul, who interestingly had an interesting look at his faith. A man of faith, but I could probably use him as one episode of this and the way he used music. But he would do Blackbird. It was one of his favorite songs to play on the guitar, because it's not an easy song to play. And Paul McCartney, you know why Paul McCartney? What the reason? And is out for everybody out there too. If you know the song Blackbird by Paul McCartney, what the meaning of that song is, the whole basis of that song is actually about the civil rights movement. Is about the struggles of the African Americans going through what's happening in the United States. And he's looking at it from the standpoint of an outsider, from somebody from the UK, looking at what's going on in America, and that's where that came from. But when they did this thing back in 2013, they said it's just sort of universal. I mean, it can look at where you are in your life right now. You can take it as a very individual thing and look at it as actually as a spiritual thing. Hey Jude, that Paul McCartney wrote. He actually wrote that for there's another John Lennon's son, Julian, when his parents were getting divorced. That's actually what that song's all about. But people look at it from a spiritual aspect. The one that, when I first started getting ready to do the research, but I had never thought about it and didn't look it up, right? But before I did the research on the background of the song was the song Let It Be by the Beatles. To me, that was always like their most spiritual song. You know the song?
I do.
Right?
Some of it.
So, in the one line, he says, Mother Mary comes to me, seeking words of wisdom, let it be, right? And so, myself, like most of the world, assumed that was a very religious, Catholic kind of song that he's speaking about the Mother Mary, right? I mean, the mother of Jesus. Paul McCartney went on to say, I was writing about my mom. Her name's Mary. And it was like, so his intent was not this deep spiritual thing. It was more the connection of, really, to him, it was about family. That when things are struggling, I go back to the wisdom of my mom, and when she would give me comfort and give me advice, and that's what the song was about to him. But if you're going to write Mother Mary, and people don't know, if you're not explaining that song right out, people are going to say, "Oh, he's talking about the mother of Jesus," and that's what I always thought the song was about. Mm-hmm. So the Beatles, at least 3 of the 4, I didn't really do much research on Ringo Starr. No disrespect to him, but his career after the Beatles, I didn't see where it fit in to this. And I could be wrong. Maybe I should look back on it and go, wow, I didn't know Ringo Starr, But for the sake of this podcast, I just didn't do any research on Ringo Starr. And honestly, I didn't do a lot of research on Paul McCartney other than when he was with the Beatles. I mean, because we can look at, he had a pretty good career after the Beatles with Wings, and he had some great hits. And continued all the way up into the 80s. But the reason I wanted to look at the Beatles, and I'm calling it the Battle of the Beatles, was because of the lives of George Harrison and John Lennon. And this started before they left the Beatles. You can see it in some of their songs. All You Need Is Love from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. They're just talking about the summer of love, and right. And it's one of the it's interesting because that's one of the things we see in the protests today, right? Love is love. All we need is love. Love is love. Mm-hmm. The Inner Light. Oh, I apologize. My thing's beeping here. The Inner Light, a song I'd never really heard of, but to be honest, I've never been a huge Beatles fan, so I don't listen to a lot of Beatles music. But they had a smash hit called Lady Madonna, which I don't know if I know. And when I first read this, I was like, oh, I should listen to the song so I know it, but I didn't have time, and I didn't want to get totally distracted, so I never listened to the song. So if you know the song Lady Madonna, again, how can you have those words not have it feel like it's somehow religious? So there's my challenge for you. If you're not going to give me a song that is in your own personal life of faith, look up the song Lady Madonna. Let me know what you think of it. But on the B-side of that, for those of you who are old enough to understand what a B-side is, they put out a song called The Inner Light, and it was written by George Harrison. And that was the beginning. This was in 1968, and this was the beginning of seeing where George Harrison's Hindu faith starts to play out in his music. And so I brought that up just to talk about The Inner Light. So in 1970, John Lennon put out his album with John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band, and he had a song there called God. And I have to read this directly. On this track, Lennon explains his religious views, or lack thereof. Twice in the first verse, he calls God a concept by which we measure our pain. So there you go. Here, now you have the two opposing views. You have George Harrison, who has a very, very strong Hindu faith, and then you have John Lennon, who was essentially an atheist. And individually, they're two most successful individual hits. In November of 1970, George Harrison released My Sweet Lord, which to me has always been about Jesus. It's always been a... This is one I brought up. I think I asked you in like week 1 of this. I was bringing up different songs, and I said, "Do you remember that?" And I said, "It's not. It. You know, at the end of it, you can hear the Hare Krishnas, like Krishna. I'm doing it again. I'm refusing to do it again because when I looked back on episode 1 on YouTube, go look at the YouTube episode of episode 1, and you see me trying to explain a song to Kathy, and I sound exactly like John Candy sitting in the back of a U-Haul talking to Maureen O'Hara about her not understanding polka music. So it's exactly what I sound like. He's like, "Oh, yeah, I thought you might know me, a few hits." Harrison wrote My Sweet Lord in praise to the Hindu god Krishna. Krishna. But what I find really interesting about that, I mean, it's... You go back on it, you should, just read the Wikipedia alone. And you know, and I hate to say that, I hate to ever say that I try to get stuff from Wikipedia, but I will go back to Wikipedia at some point and see what was written in there. I don't use Wikipedia as my go-to source because anybody can add or delete from Wikipedia, and so if I read something on Wikipedia and I like it, and I think, "Oh wow, that's really profound," I'll try to confirm it, or get a second source to go, "Oh yeah, that is what it was about." This is interesting. I'm sorry, this is from Wikipedia. That's why I explained this whole thing. But this part of it's really interesting because, and I'm going to read this. Later in the 70s, My Sweet Lord was the center of a heavily published copyright infringement suit due to its similarity to the Ronnie Mac song "He's So Fine," a 1963 hit for the New York girl group, the Chiffons. In 1976, Harrison was found to have subconsciously plagiarized the song, a verdict that had repercussions throughout the music industry. Rather than the Chiffons song, he said he used the out-of-copyright Christian hymn "Oh Happy Day" as his inspiration for the melody. Okay, I find this incredibly fascinating. I can't get into George Harrison's head, and I'm not going to say things that aren't factual, that I can't prove. However, I find it fascinating that he writes this song about the Hindu god Krishna, and then when he finds himself in trouble or in times of dire straits, in a time of struggle, which happens to be about the song, the thing he turns to is the faith of Jesus Christ. Oh no, it was a hymn. It was a hymn, "Oh Happy Day." I'm sorry. Play those two songs back to back and tell me they actually sound alike. I don't know how he says he got the lyrics or the melody for My Sweet Lord from "Oh Happy Day." I say there was a seed planted of faith somewhere in George Harrison because he even says, if you go on to read stuff that George Harrison put out, and this is why I will defend the Hindu faith, right? The Hindu faith is all about anything can be a god, anything, right? There are thousands of gods in the Hindu faith, and the Buddhist faith, and I'm going to stop because I'm going to get myself all tangled up, and then I'm going to say something that's actually incorrect because I'm going to pull the two, Buddhism and Hindu faith, together, and I'm going to say something factually wrong because I don't have the facts written down in front of me right now. However, Harrison himself would say, and it's quoted in one of his writings, that he says it basically to the point that the way to God, that there's one God like a tree, but there's many different roots that can bring you to that one God. And that's sort of how he said, that's how he sort of explained it in his faith, that there's many different gods, and they're all like roots, but they will lead you to the one true God. And so as a Christian, of course, I struggle with that because we talk about the one true God, the God of Abraham. However, so there's a little bit more faith in this today, is if we look at the God of Abraham is the God of many faiths. God of Abraham that is our God. That is the Jewish God. That is the Islam God. Muhammad was just a prophet to them, not a god. Their God is the same God that the Jewish and the Christian faith has. The difference is we say, because of our sins, atonement only comes through the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. There's only one way to God, and that is through Jesus. But that doesn't discount all of the fantastic things that the Hindu faith does on planet Earth. When you live your life not just good, but better. So we have that song, right? My Sweet Lord. And that was one that comes from the Jesus movement, which early 70s, and we're going to talk about that. Maybe I'll do that one next week. I will plant that right now. Next week, we're going to talk about the Jesus movement of the 1970s. Okay? So the other song is Imagine by John Lennon. Have you ever heard the song Imagine by John Lennon? It's really hard when Kathy's on a podcast and won't be on the camera because she just sort of nods and you know the song, right?
I know of the song, only a little bit of the song.
Okay, so most people know the song. I mean, I'm struggling with this a little bit because I can't wrap my head around part of... When asked about the song's meaning during a 1980 interview, Lennon told Sheff that Dick Gregory had given Ono and him a Christian prayer book which inspired him the concept behind Imagine. The concept of positive prayer, if you can imagine a world at peace with no denominations of religion, not without religion, but without this my God is bigger than your God thing, then it can be true. The World Church called me once and asked, can we use the lyrics to imagine and just change it to imagine one religion? That showed me they didn't understand it at all. It would defeat the whole purpose of the song, the whole idea. So, and this is why I originally said this is like an evil song. This is like an anti-Christian song. And in a way it is, right? Because it's saying we don't want Christianity, we don't want... when he's saying denominations, I don't believe he's talking about just Christian denominations. He's because in Christianity we can argue and debate over doxology, which I myself have been involved in, and we can look at scriptural interpretations, and I won't really argue scriptural interpretation, except unless it's blatant apostasy. Like, that people will argue that Jesus didn't really die on the cross. That I will argue. And I will argue when I will argue other churches defending other churches if one church is saying, for an example, I debated with a pastor one day because he stated, he used one piece of scripture that said that our church will not have any musical instruments. Everything has to be, oh my gosh, it's 9:30 already. This went really quick. So I wasn't keeping track of time at all. We're going to go a few minutes over, and then we'll wrap up here. But I have to finish this, right? So one pastor argued that churches can't have instruments in them because this one Bible verse doesn't talk about instruments, and he thinks that churches that have instruments is wrong. That's in my opinion, goofy in one aspect. If you want to have your church where you do everything a cappella and there's no instruments and it brings you all closer to God, fantastic. That's not a bad thing. But to tell other churches they can't have instruments when the Bible clearly mentions instruments on several occasions, that's just wrong. Here's my issue with, and it's always been an issue of debate with John Lennon's Imagine, is that the line says, imagine a world, there's no heaven, no heaven, no hell, and so there's no religion. And the issue with that is, if there is no heaven and there is no hell, then there is no reason for Christianity. There is no reason. Then Jesus died for nothing. It's an incredible insult to how we live our faith. But he brought that in because that was the stance where him and Yoko Ono lived their lives, in this attitude of meanness. And you can see it in other aspects of their music. You can see it in other aspects. They wanted world peace. They wanted to see the world around them not have all this protesting and all this stuff going on. And I apologize, I got to go a couple minutes over, but I got to tie this into what's going on today. So you think about when this song was released, we have the protests against the church, we have protests against the government, we have veterans, we have soldiers coming home from Vietnam who are being absolutely, insulted and attacked. And so there's this big argument against the war. We want no peace. And the overall arching aspect of all of those movements, even though they called it the summer of love, and it was all about, peace and happiness, the only way they understood to get rid, and that's what's in this song, this is why it bothers me so much, is the only way they see to have a world of peace is to eliminate all the things they disagree with. If I could just get rid of all the things I disagree with, then I would have such a peaceful world. Well, you know what? I'm a very happily married man, but there are times when my wife absolutely frustrates the bejeebers out of me. And, and sometimes, you think, you know what? If I just never got married, I would be so much happier, And so the idea of that is I would be happy if I didn't have her around. Now that we know that's not true, but that's the way some people think. And that's the way some people think about individual things, and that's the way people think about world things. And I brought that up in a joking way about our marriage because it is a foundational thing to say about people who are struggling with the idea of divorce. I'm not happy, and the easiest way to find happiness is just to eliminate the thing that I think is making me unhappy. Not to bring it into unity, not to bring it into a fullness, not to have an understanding of our differences, but just to eliminate those who have differences from us. And it fires me up because it's exactly what we're seeing today in the protests and everything going on. If I can just eliminate all the people who don't see my worldview, then my worldview will have complete peace. That's how I see the song Imagine. And so that's why I will defend George Harrison's Hindu view over John Lennon's, it's just a God view. And so that's where I see the battle of the Beatles. And I would love to have taken this a little bit deeper, but I went over today, and I apologize. So maybe down the road, maybe I'll have more of a follow-up on this. But when you look at the music you're listening to today, when it has implications of the world around you and how it affects you, think back on where your faith in God is. And if you don't think you have a faith in God, then you know what? Be willing to explore it a little bit. Because if somebody's telling you that your worldview should be eliminated, then, oh wait, Jesus said the world will hate you because of me. And we'll end it right there. So y'all have a blessed day. We will be doing live services, as always, at the Grange Hall up on 337. For those who live local in the Allegheny National Forest, always welcome and wonderful to see you there. If not, check us out on our Faith in the Forest YouTube channel. We will keep videos popping up there. And God willing, I will see you back here next week for the next podcast. Goodbye, everybody.